morning. How are we doing? I feel like that intro is a little better than the last series intro where I felt like I had to give you this epic. Well, good morning. We do start a new series. Happy September. I feel like it was like January, February were like, and March were really slow, and then it went like April, September, like in that amount of time frame. So welcome to September. But we do start a new series. It's called Letters to Leaders, and this is actually going to be one of the longest series I think I've ever been a part of. It's about an 8-week series, and I am incredibly excited about it because I've contacted other leaders who have way better thoughts on the subject than I do because they've been doing it for longer. And I thought, you know what, instead of me telling you all these things, I want to bring them up and I want to talk with them so you can hear them as well. So I think it's mapped out every other Sunday. You'll hear somebody other than me. And I'll kind of set it up like this morning. I'm going to preach a little bit, and then I'm going to bring up Rob Anderson, who's going to share his thoughts on leadership. So I'm really excited for what God's going to do in and through us through this series. So John Maxwell said, leadership is influence. And we all are leaders, and we all have influence. I don't know if you realize that. But the question for us is, how well are we leading? And so, again, over these next 8 weeks, we're going to look at key principles in leadership and how to answer the question, how well are we leading in those areas of leadership that we have? All right, so you ready? Sound good? All right, so I want you to know that at this very moment in time, I don't want to terrify you, but at this very moment in time, I am indeed the most powerful person in this room. Well, there's no screaming, so obviously you're not too terrified. But I'm going to soak it in because I don't get this opportunity very often. Makes me want to come out and say, I got the power. And as I was going through this week, I thought I should learn some dance moves, but I would no longer be the most powerful person. I'd be the most ridiculous person in the room if I started dancing. But think about it. I mean, as somebody on stage, I have a captive audience. I can tell you anything that I want to tell you. Anything. And I can use this position to create kind of lemmings, right? Or I can use this position to teach you about Jesus and what Jesus has done in my life and what I've seen Jesus do in the lives of other people. So I have the option to use my position to gain me or to benefit the kingdom. But maybe you've experienced other abuses of power within an organization, whether it's at work, in a committee, or on a team. Maybe it's with your boss or another coworker. Authority has kind of been taken one step too far, and the position held was used to benefit the individual and make them look good, regardless of how others in the organization were impacted. Now, maybe this abuse of power was in a relationship, your significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, or even friend. Maybe they abused their power within the relationship. They controlled every aspect of the relationship. They used force, coercion, manipulation to get you to do what they wanted, not what was best for the relationship. You see, power can be used negatively or it can be used very positively. Currently, being the most powerful person in the room, again, I can use this power to seek God's guidance and direction. I can use this platform, this stage, to encourage others to build up and encourage rather than tear down. I can use it to challenge assumptions and preferences that people have had before, to provide others with information that will cause them to stop and evaluate how they're living, acting, and loving, including myself. I can use this moment, again, to tell you what Jesus has done in my life and how he is cooler than the other side of the pillow. I can use this power I've been given as a moment of surrender and offering to tell you of the love and grace of Jesus Christ. So I know what I'm going to do as the most powerful person in the room. But my question to you is, what do you do when you realize that you are indeed the most powerful person in the room? Do you believe that you have influence in other people's lives? There you go. But I think this is also one of the problems, is that we are often unaware and we assume we don't have any power and influence because it's just some little old me. Who am I to do anything? What am I to give, right? And this has become quite evident through social media. I see on a daily basis people who are completely oblivious to the power and influence they have. And because of all this, they make poor decisions. They push send before they really should have paused and thought about what they hit send to. And it ends up reaching far more people than they ever could have imagined. Again, how does this happen? It's because we don't realize or even accept that we have great power and influence in this life. Regardless of who we are, what our age or status is, there will come a moment in time when you will be the most powerful person in the room. So what are you going to do with it? What do you do when all eyes are on you and you realize, I can do anything I want right now because I got the power? So we're going to look at John 13. Now, a slight disclaimer. For those of you who were here a few weeks ago, we did cover this passage briefly, but I have actually had this series lined up for a little while, and I knew this one was coming, so we're going to do it again. So, for those of you who were here a couple weeks ago when you listened to Spider-Man, we only talked about a little bit of John 13, but we're going to talk about it again this morning because I believe we can't hear this verse too much. We can't be reminded too much of what it means to be leaders when it comes to our life and our service and how we lead. So this is John 13, verse 1. Jesus knew the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. So he showed them the full extent of his love, not just a little bit, not just half, or not just for a few hours, but Jesus showed the disciples the fullness of his love. He showed them what it was like to love completely until the very end. Verses 2 and 3. Then the evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So things were already beginning to happen in the story. Judas would soon betray Jesus, and we would read in verse 3 that Jesus knew that all things were under his power. All things. Not just a few, not just for those in the room on that night, but in this moment, Jesus recognizes that God the Father has placed everything under his authority and under his power. He was indeed that night the most powerful person in the room. And remember, Jesus is going to show the disciples the full extent of his love. He's there to show them what the full extent looks like when he has all the power and when he has all the authority. He's there to show them what love needs to look like when he is the most powerful person in the room. So when it dawns on you that you're the most powerful person in the room, what's your next move going to be? Is it going to be like, yeah, party on, Garth, here we go? Now seriously, what's your next move? What's your next move when your spouse looks at you and says, what are we doing for dinner? Which I hate that question. I don't really care. I don't want to make the decision. What's your next move when your friend comes to you and they're struggling? And they say, well, what do I do? What's your next move when you're the leader of an organization and you want to move forward but others are reluctant? What's your next move if you're a teacher in a classroom? You got eager ears and bodies waiting to learn or not. What do you do? Tell you what Jesus did. Verse 4, so he got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. In that moment that he realized that all power and all authority was his, he got up and took off his outer clothing, which was the symbol of his rabbinical authority. The piece of clothing that signified to all that he had power and authority over others as teacher and leader. He took this off, wrapped a towel around his waist, which was a symbol of that of a servant getting ready to do work. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Now, hold up. This is Jesus, right? I mean, like, the Son of God, the guy that's going to die on a cross and then get raised up 3 days later. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've not known anyone else that has done that. Anybody? No, nobody's known somebody that came back to life? Well, like Jesus. Well, see, this is when my illustrations just don't often work. You medical people in the room. Killing me. But, here's Jesus. He's the Son of God, and the disciples, they're like, Jesus, what are you doing? They're wondering why he was doing this, but we need to come back to the opening verse of this chapter. Jesus is showing the disciples the full extent of his love. He's showing them what their next move needs to be when they realize they're the most powerful person in the room. And rather than basking in the glory of the moment, he shows them the first thing that should go through their minds is to shed their symbols of authority and wash some people's feet. Or a better understanding is, Jesus sheds his authority and comes and cleans the toilet in our house. Make sense? So here we have the dirty and disgusting feet of the disciples being touched by God and washed by God. And the disciples were left speechless by Jesus' humility. Have you ever been left speechless by Jesus' humility in your own life? I heard a preacher the other day say, Jesus' love is a love that absolutely takes our breath away. And I thought the same thing about his humility. Jesus' humility is a humility that absolutely takes our breath away. It's shocking, stunning, and it's outside the norm of what people with authority do. Do people look at us that follow Jesus or are here in this church? If they're not part of this church, do they look at who we are as a church and say, man, I'm speechless by how humble they are. I'm speechless by how they love. I'm speechless by who they are and what they do for this community. Do they do that? I hope so. But are they ever stunned, stopped dead in their tracks because you and I have shed our own personal authority in our places of work, in our homes, at our schools, when we're on the street, in the grocery store, in church, in the back of the coffee line? Lord have mercy, give me grace on that one. But simply put, is your humility a humility that can leave people speechless? Is your love a love that can leave people speechless? Is your action and behavior as a follower of Jesus one that leaves people speechless in a good way? See, this is a great question, and one that I don't think we can ask too often. Because to be honest, whether we follow Jesus or not, being humble will go much farther at work, in school, at home, than selfishness, arrogance, pride, and an egotistical mentality. So Jesus, in this moment, sheds his authority and takes on the role of a servant and leaves his disciples speechless. So what have you done when put in the position of leadership and power? Have you exerted your power and influence for your own sake? For your own benefit? Or have you leveraged your power and authority to influence others for the sake of who is in the room? All right, we're going to jump down to verse 12. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. He says, "Do you understand what I have done for you?" He asked them. "Do you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. And now that I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's. I have set for you an example that you should do as I have done for you." So what does Jesus do? He sets for what? He sets us a what? Example. Very good. See? So we need to know you're paying attention. He sets for us an example. And the word John used here goes even beyond of what we might think of as an example. He used the word hupadagma. It's your Greek lesson this morning. So hupadagma means a thing to be imitated. So Jesus says, look, this thing that I just did for you, how I took off everything that represented who I was and as an authority figure that had power and put on the likeness of a servant, and then I got down and got my hands dirty and I washed your feet. That thing that I just did for you, you are to imitate it over and over and over again. Because this thing is to be the original framework of what gets imitated and repeated by anyone who says, I follow Jesus. And then he finishes up saying, I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things. So now that you know these things, and this is the one that I just want to close my Bible and say, la la la, I forgot. I don't want to pay attention anymore. Because he says, look, now that you are hearing what I'm saying, go and do them. It's hard. Because sometimes we can get a big head on our shoulders, can't we? Sometimes we can get caught in this, I am greater and better than. I am, right? I am on this stage. I am talking to you. I don't know if you know, but I am the communications director for the city of Fairborn. I can tell you anything I want to tell you. I could get fired the next day, but we take on this godlike air sometimes. I am the parent. You do as I say. Why? Because I said so. But Jesus reminds the disciples, he says, look, I am God and you are not. And when you realize and live into this fact, you will be blessed. Because look, if I, your Lord and Master, am willing to shed my own authority for the greater good and serve, you are to do the same. He says, you are to do the same. And the Apostle Paul, I love how he put it in his letter to the Philippians. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but to each of you to the interests of the other. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness. Being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. Again, there's going to come a moment in your life when you're going to want to hold on to your authority, whatever that looks like, and never let it go. There's going to come a moment when you are in charge and you can make the big decision. You have the opportunity to make your life great and miserable for everybody else. There's going to come a moment when your humility and servant-mindedness will be challenged and put on the line. It's like you're towing the line. It's right there. You can either choose to remain humble, or you can leap over it and say, nah, this is all about me. Jesus says, give up that all about me moment and get your hands a little dirty, wash some feet, and show others what it means to love in the fullest extent. All right, so I told you, I invited Rob up here, so if you want to come join me. And again, he manages a pretty big organization. We're about, 250, 300 people. And I got to be honest, he knows a lot about leadership. You need a microphone. He knows a lot about leadership. And before I started working at the city, you're just the guy that ran the city. Right. And I never realized what leadership like this looks like. Jeez. No pressure.
Right. That? Is that what it is?
No. But I asked him to come up here because when I started working with him, to be honest, he is one of the most humble individuals that I've ever worked for. And he's a city manager. He makes decisions for all of us who live in Fairborn. Well, he helps make decisions.
Right.
Somebody like him could get this big head and not care about anybody below him and say, this is what I say and how I'm going to do it. And one of the first moments that I recognized that we had the employee picnic here when I first started working a year ago. And one of the first moments of humility I saw was he took out the trash. He took out the trash. I don't know many people in your position who would say, I'm just like the rest of you. So I asked them to come up here and say, hey, help us understand what it means to do that, and how we can kind of keep things in check, and then what we as a church can do for the community.
Sure.
Sound good? All right, so I gave him some questions about a week ago, and my manuscript mind typed them all out, went into work the next day. He's like, yeah, I got your email. Whichever ones you want to ask are fine. We're just going to wing it. I'm like, okay. This is my most favorite part of doing these things, is winging it.
Can I say something before we get started?
Sure.
One, thanks for letting me come up here and do this. This is truly an honor. Two, you have an awesome voice. Your band is amazing. That was fantastic. I said to Kristen, you should front a band, like an indie band. You're tremendous. So that's two.
If I'm my life to do that.
And three, for an introvert, you're pretty doggone good up here in front of people.
This is all Jesus currently.
Right? Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Amen.
When I felt God say, hey, I want you to do this for a living, I laughed and said, you're real funny.
Right.
Because I don't like getting up in front of people.
So the one thing I wanted to say is, you've used a couple of words up here that I think are very important when you're in leadership. One is humility.
Yeah.
Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, says the number one trait a good leader needs to have is humility. I add to that, I think empathy also helps. And then, two is power. I think a lot of times when you talk about government, people feel powerless against the government.
Yeah.
So it's not only the feeling of being powerful, but also the feeling of being powerless. And I think helping people understand that they have power is part of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did you get into city management? Like, is this something you've always wanted to do?
No, it was dumb luck. I'll be honest. I was out of college. I was the city planner for the city of Tupelo, Mississippi. Did that for a year and a half, and then came to the city of Kettering. I met a gentleman there who was the assistant city manager. He got a city manager's job in Vandalia, hired me to be his assistant because he liked the background I had in planning, economic development, and I just got the bug. He went and took another job. I was promoted to his position, and I really enjoy being at the top of the organization because I really like to be involved in all aspects of what we're doing, and I really like the contact that I get with the public.
Very cool. So what is it like? I have a lot to do on my everyday. I mean, my email box is like constant. I have a teeny tiny one. I have one person that's with me who I kind of have to manage her schedule. I can't imagine what it's like. I mean, how many employees do we have?
241 full-time and then 60 or so part-time.
So what's it like? I mean, knowing that you have to manage that along with all the thoughts and minds of all the other citizens in Fairborn. Like, that's a lot.
It can be if you think about it that way. But so my knowledge base is an inch deep and a foot wide. So I'm not necessarily an expert in anything. I have expertise in planning and economic development, but I don't know how to run a fire department. I don't know how to run a police department. So I put a lot of trust in the folks that run those organizations to be the expert and to help me understand what we're doing. The important part, though, is I help work with our city council to set policy. So I'm a resource for them in that I can give them information if they need it, and they can have a conversation with themselves, and I can provide input on that. So I make the joke, and it's not really a joke, that I send a lot of email. So you have to be proficient at sending email, knowing how to use Outlook.
Right.
It's probably the number one skill.
So what would you say is the most important aspect of your position?
In terms of like what I need to know or how I need to behave?
How you need to lead, like for your own self. Like what is that one thing that you're like, man, if I don't hit this mark, I am not leading well. So what does leading well look like to you?
That's a good question. So
it's not on here.
All right, and it's hard to gauge that in one thing. Like it's not just one. There's not one benchmark.
Right.
To me, leadership is serving others. I think because, and I say this all the time, I spend more of my waking hours with the folks I work with and the people I live with at home, and I need to like them at least as much as I do my family, right? Because we spend so much time together. So part of that is I need to treat them like I would treat my family, because it's important. One, I think what love others as I have loved you, is that,
Yeah.
I'm surprised the church didn't catch on fire with me being here. But, that's one of the things that I try to put into place. Love others as I love you. How do I want to be treated is how I'm going to treat you, because, it's not fair any other way.
Yeah. And that's a really, this is what I like about often doing things off the cuff. I don't know that I've ever thought about leading people the way and liking them and treating them necessarily in that capacity. That's a really incredible insight to say, when we go to our workplaces, do we like the people at work and treat them like we treat our family? And if we look at it that way, man, that takes on a completely different shift and spin on how I walk in tomorrow.
When we have the full gamut of dysfunction in a family,
Right.
in the work environment as
Right.
we do at home, right? I mean,
Right.
it's exactly the same almost.
That's true. So we've been talking about this example that Jesus gave us on what leadership looks like. When you think of humility and servant leadership, like, what is one of the first things that comes to your mind?
Sure. So it's my goal to take care of the employees. And by take care of them, it's to make sure that they're in an environment that they can be successful. And two, that they're able to focus on their work and be able to do what they need to do the right way. So what that means is, how can I help them achieve that? How can I help them better themselves? We did a few things in the city since I've taken over that we had stopped doing in the past. So we have a program now where you can go back to school and get some additional learning that benefits you as a person, but also benefits the city. Because I believe in lifelong learning, right? We always need to try to keep our minds sharp and learn more. So trying to make sure that the employees have the tools that they need to be successful is probably the number one thing that I try to take care of. Two, it's working with our city council to make sure that they know everything that we're doing, so that when they get asked questions, and goodness, they get asked everything and anything wherever they go, how can they be informed so that they can educate the public?
So, how do you stay grounded? Because I would think it'd be really easy to not. I mean, and how do you not let your pride take over?
Sure. I could put if I had my phone, I could put a phone call in now, and I could have every firefighter in the city of Fairborn at that door.
Right.
Right? And that's a lot of responsibility, or a lot of power. How do I stay grounded is, I grew up in Xenia. My parents were, blue-collar workers. They both worked at Delco. I didn't really have, I was well provided for growing up, but it's not like I had a silver spoon in my mouth. And so I never really knew what, that's kind of silly, but I don't really have a desire to have everything for me, right? No, I like to have things, and I like to do things, but I've got a family that keeps me grounded. I've got, siblings that keep me grounded. I've got a fiance that keeps me well grounded, and make sure that and believe me, there are times where I start to inch up a little bit in the pride department, and it's very quickly reduced back down in a very good way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, are there triggers for you that, when you hit that mark, you're like, hold on. Because I think it'd be really easy just to jump over those and say, no, we're going this way. This is the decision we're going to make, because this is what I want to do. So,
Right.
When you hit that point and you say you're brought back down, what is that point?
And it's different depending on the situation, but it's the hardest, that's the biggest challenge that I have is, I have a understanding of how I want things to be done and a way that I think we need to get there. And it's, what I don't always realize is I don't always have the right answer. So it's using my ears and my mouth in proportion, right? And so trying to listen more than I talk, right?
Say that again. That was...
So using my ears and my mouth in proportion. So you have two ears and one mouth. Use them proportionately, and try to listen to what others have to say. And we've made some decisions that I didn't agree with, or didn't want to do, let's say, and they've turned out perfectly fine. So it's just understanding that others are experts too.
Yeah, and I think that's huge, and that's something that, again, is applicable to anybody, here, is that it's how we hit that moment of, press and pause and say, okay, I may not know it all.
Right.
And for me, it's especially, okay, again, it's that moment where God is God and I am not, and I can't control this situation like I want to, or should not control the situation like I want to. We've called this series Letters to Leaders. So if you could write a letter to a leader, what are 3 things that you would make sure you included?
So, and I've thought about that question that you sent me the most, because I'm trying to figure out how to answer that. I speak a lot at Wright State. I got my master's degree at Wright State in public administration, so I come back and give back and speak to those classes quite a bit. And the things that I tell folks, if you want to be a city manager, is one, you have to have a thick skin, especially if you do anything with social media, right? I mean, if you do anything in social media, you have to have a thick skin, because you'll get called things and innuendo made about you that you never could have imagined.
Right.
2, you have to be able to listen. And 3, you have to be able to, when you make a decision, be able to sell that decision. And what I mean by that is, I chose the Maxwell book as there's a part in there that talks a little bit about credibility as having change in your pocket. So you try to fill your pockets by making decisions that others can buy into. And when you start to take advantage of that, you take change out of your pocket and you lose it. You always try to keep your pocket full, because you want to make decisions that people can understand, and you tell them in a way that they really buy into that, and not you abuse your authority just to get something done. I've done that. I mean, there have been times where I'm like, no, we're going to do this, and that's how it's going to be. But that's very few and far between.
Sure. So are there any stories like that you have, kind of taken your authority maybe one step too far, and looking back, you're like, you know what? We probably could have gone in a different direction, and it may have turned out differently. Again, this was not the list either.
So I'm trying to think. There's probably so many to pick from. I'm trying to think which one would make the most sense. But it could be anything, and a lot of it has to do with, so a specific department will want to do something, and because I don't understand how that department operates, I will try to make a decision based on my limited understanding, and they'll say, no, we can't do it that way. You don't understand, we can't do it that way. And once we then get, an example escapes me, but one specific department will say, no, you're crazy, that's not possible. And then we'll do it their way, and it works out fine.
So it's again that moment of just taking that step back. And I think sometimes when we are in leadership positions, we get the my way, the highway mentality, and it takes those moments of hitting the brakes and looking at the whole picture, not just our tunnel vision picture, and say, no, we're doing this because I said we're doing it. So I got one more question.
Okay.
So as a church and as individuals, what are ways in which we can lead and leverage our authority for good within the Fairborn community? Or where do you see holes in our community that you say, you know what, the church has an incredible amount of good power and influence. Use it here. Are there places that we can do things within the community that you see we could fill?
And I know that we ask people to get involved all the time. There's a lot of need and not a lot of manpower to go around. The one thing that I would say could make the most concerted effort would be just to educate yourself on what the city does. You've worked here almost 2 years, I think, now, and there are still days where you're like, well, I didn't know we did that.
Right.
Right? And you're on the inside, so to speak. So I think getting involved in just educating yourself, no matter it's Fairborn, Xenia, whatever community you live in, is big. Now, and it can run the gamut. You could be like Tara and spend all weekend at Sweet Corn Festival and work harder than I did there, frankly. Or it's just a matter of understanding the dynamics of the city and knowing that the city and the schools are separate. And the city and, I don't have any authority over the school buildings or anything like that, and vice versa. Just knowing the simple things and just understanding what we try to do. And I give Kevin credit. He's running for council. Kevin, there you are. That's a big job. I mean, it's a big responsibility, but he feels called to get involved, and that's awesome. We need more qualified, like Kevin, to do that and really dig in, because, new thoughts and new ideas are great.
Yeah, and I think we had talked about that answer, and I think for us, it's sometimes we want to we want to get our hands dirty, but sometimes
Right.
getting our hands dirty means really educating ourselves on how the process works,
Right.
and what the proper channels are and how things go about it, and being willing to be the vocal advocates, and not always the vocal naysayers.
Sure.
Because naysayer is a lot easier at times than educating
yeah.
yourself to be an
Heck yeah.
advocate. But I think that's a really important point, is that some of those holes that we have within our community are just that. You know,
Sure.
it's a lack of, hey, you know what? This isn't always a bad thing, because look at what it's going to do.
Right.
I mean, roundabouts are really easy to navigate.
Man. So that's exactly right. So, time is scarce.
Yeah.
Right? We all have things that we're doing, and we have kids and family and all that stuff. It takes all the time, free time that we have. So just understanding one thing, like the roundabout, and knowing how that works, and it's okay to have an opinion that you don't like it. That's
Right.
perfectly fine. But educate yourself about it, and so that you can argue intelligently instead of just saying it's going to be, Indy 500 up over the middle of that thing, and it's going to be
Right.
mass chaos.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I really appreciate you coming. I know
Yeah.
this is...
Anything for you.
Well, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I tell Rob on probably not as often as I need to, like, he's got more Jesus in him than he either realizes or maybe wants to admit.
Right.
But I mean, and I think that's what I love about this idea of humility and leading, is because everybody should lead this way. I mean, whether it's, again, at our work, with our coworkers,
Right.
in our organization, at the job site, at school, wherever it is, having this servant-mindedness, and to realize that just because I may be, highest on the totem pole doesn't mean I have to treat everybody like I'm the highest on the totem pole. So I'm gonna finish. You can chill out here
Okay.
for a moment, or you can.
I think I've had enough of those spotlights
Okay.
for a minute. Thank you, though. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So I asked Rob, I said, what is your favorite leadership book? And he said the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. So I have 2 copies to give away at some point this morning, and anybody is welcome to them. But I wanted to close this out by the next time you find yourself in that position of power and authority, wherever it is, when you realize that you have the next move that could change people's lives, I pray that you remember the night Jesus was with his disciples. I pray that you recognize in his moment of having absolute power and absolute authority, he gave it up for you and I. And I pray in this moment that when it dawns on you that you have incredible influence, that you choose humility. I pray you choose to follow Jesus and leverage your power and authority for the greater good. I pray that you work with integrity, honor, and a sense of doing for others. I pray that you pause for a moment and take a breath. Say, man, this isn't about me, but it's about showing others the full extent of what it means to love and truly follow Jesus. So I saw something that somebody shared yesterday from author and speaker Bob Goff. He said, God didn't give you influence so you could lead people better. He wants you to love them more. So God didn't give us influence so that we could lead people better. He gave us influence because he wants us to love them more. And we can love them more by being humble when we lead them. So I pray that we all lead like Jesus and make the world speechless by our humility, service, and most importantly, by how we love one another. Amen? Amen. I go forth in the grace and love of our Lord Jesus Christ, who calls us to shed our authority and our power and use it to leverage the goodness for the kingdom. He calls us to serve in humility and ultimately to love people well. Go in peace. Amen. Amen.